Hi everyone, welcome to my 12 journals of 2016, which are inspired by Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2016. And if you know me, you know that I've been playing along with this challenge for a long time, just changing it up a little bit this time, and I will end up with a journal at the end of the 12 months. So this was Tim's May tag, and he has been mixing two previous tags or two techniques from previous tags and bringing them together to form a completely new tag. I'm going to take his inspiration and create a journal page, and this is my journal page for the month of May. You will see me create this page, and at the end of the series I will show you how to combine them into a book. If you fancy doing something like this, a journal page a month basically, and each of my pages also has a tag, but more about that as we go through the tutorial. So each of my pages start out exactly the same way. I can start with any cardstock as a base. This time I'm using white, and you can see that I've got a page and a tag. So the page itself measures 10¼ inches by 7 inches, and I've scored it from the left and then from the right at 5 inches. So my pages are 5 inches across, and that gives me a 1/4 inch gusset in the middle. And that gusset means that one, I'll be able to tie it into my book when it's finished, and two, I can add dimension to the page without it making the book go funny. And I've also got a tag 6 inches by 5¼ inches. So one of the techniques that Tim talks about is using tissue tape as a resist medium, and I'm going to do that here. So I'm just measuring the width of the tissue tape that I'm going to use. So my tissue tape measures 3/4 inch, and I'm marking a border left and right of my page of 3/4 inch, but because my tags are all going to end up looking the same and just poking out the same amount at the top of or the edge of the page, which I'll show you more of later, I'm marking a 1/2 inch border at the top of the tag on both sides. So when I've finished, I will be using the tissue tape, but for now I'm going to be using the tissue tape as a masking tape. Might be a little bit wasteful, but actually because it is resisting, I can wipe it off and use it again, and because of the tackiness of it, it doesn't stick too readily to the paper. So I'm using a ripe persimmon distress stain to give me that orange border, and I'm going to do the same process using the same tape, so being a little bit thrifty and adding a ripe persimmon stripe down each edge of my page. So you'll see that I start out thinking this page is going to be really bright, but actually that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, so I'll show you how to tone it down, and it actually becomes the theme of the page. And I'm going to repeat that process on the top of what will become the tag. And then once that distress stain is dry, I'm going to use the Tim Holtz tissue tape across the top of my stripe. So this has the effect of muting that stripe a little bit and adding some interest to those borders. And I really do like tissue tape for this kind of thing. It does stick where you want it to, but it also is a little bit forgiving, so it's quite a nice product. And of course this one actually says chocolate, so it can't be bad, can it? And I'm going to repeat that on the top of what will become the tag, and then because it's a little bit narrower than the tape, I'm just going to trim off those edges. Now, because I don't have the tattered florals that Tim uses as his second technique, I'm going to go with the flower theme on this page instead. And I'm going to use these stamps, which are by Rubber Dance, and they're called Antique Botanicals. You can see I have used these stamps a lot. They're very pretty and very versatile. And I'm going to be using the butterfly for the tissue tape resist. Now, I did think that I was just going to put down little splodges of tape and then stamp the butterfly on top with an archival ink that was permanent and wouldn't or would resist anything that I put on top of that, but I've decided to go about this a slightly different way. So I'm going to start out by stamping my butterflies on the page with my Ranger archival ink. Now, I was going with the principle of laying down the colour. Again, I'm using my distress stains, this time in the ripe persimmon and the squeezed lemonade. So I'm using them as a paint and colouring in my butterflies. And I was going with the principle that I would then overlay them with the tape. But they end up, although they do resist and the resist works well, because of the fussy detail on the stamp and the text on the tissue tape, I wasn't happy with them, and you'll see that I do change it up. But the principle still works. If you lay down some tissue tape and stamp on it, that tissue tape will resist other mediums that you put onto the page. So it's quite a useful thing to use with your art journaling. Now, the other thing is where to place these details on my tag. You will have seen, if you've been watching this series, that each of my tags has a memory from the month and the tag picture of the original inspiration. So not much of the actual background of the tag does show by the time I've added the pictures and the journaling. So I need to keep those butterfly details to the very edge of the tag if I want any of them to show. So going with the smaller butterflies, and just adding them to the very edge of the tag. You can see here I've already got a few smudges, but they won't show once the tag is complete. And colouring them in exactly the same way as I did on the main page, using squeezed lemonade and the ripe persimmon distress stains. So Tim laid down his tissue tape in areas where he wanted to stamp and create a resist on his background. I'm going to use this in a slightly different way, and I'm going to lay down, I'm actually going to cut my tissue tape out. It's a little bit fiddly, and I have to say it probably wasn't worth the trouble. So I'm going to fast forward it a little bit, but just to give you the principle. It's much better to do it Tim's way, so I'd definitely pop over to his blog and have a look at that. So basically stamping out those butterflies and then cutting them out. So like I said, a little bit tricky, but I did persevere, and I'm just giving you the benefit of my experience. This would work quite well on a less fussy tissue tape and a less fussy stamp, if that makes sense. And then things would be much better. The result at the end would have been much nicer. So basically I'm cutting out a tissue tape butterfly and placing that over the top of each of my stamped coloured in butterflies. And when my butterflies were larger than my tissue tape, all I did was join two pieces of tissue tape together to give me enough surface to be able to stamp my butterfly. And you just need to be a little bit careful not to pull those two pieces apart as you're cutting out your image. You can see that I'm putting the tissue tape onto my craft mat because it's got a shiny surface and the tissue tape releases easily once I'm ready to cut the shapes out. So once my butterfly is cut out, then I'm placing it directly over top of the image. Now it looks okay, but you can see at the end of the page I wasn't quite happy with it, and I changed my mind a little bit. So using one of the flower stamps from the Antiques Botanical set, I am creating a couple of masks. So I'm stamping the flower at the sticky edge of the post-it note, not on the sticky edge, but where that sticky edge is underneath, and then cutting out, and I've got about 3 pages here, so I'm cutting out my flower shape, and I will be using these post-it notes as masks to stamp a flower border or group at the bottom of my journal page. So again, I'm using my Ranger archival ink because this will be permanent once it's dry and perfect for adding other wet mediums to the top, whether to colour in the stamps or to create any backgrounds that I want to create on this journal page. So what I'm going to do is stamp and then cover up that stamped area, and I also want to cover up my border strips, which I'm going to do with 2 extra post-it notes. So remember, if you're going to be using wet mediums on your page, you want to be stamping with a permanent ink. I'm using a black Ranger archival ink, and I am stamping an arrangement of flowers and using the masks to layer them up. At this point I realised I didn't really want that stem, and I found another little use for that tissue tape, and I'm just using a little strip of it to mask off the stem of this stamp so that I don't get those stems all over my arrangement. So just moving the masks about and not forgetting that little bit of tape each time I ink up my stamp. You can see how easy it is to do this with any kind of stamp really, to mask and stamp, overstamp, and create a group or a crowd if you were stamping with people stamps across any kind of journal page. So you can see my butterflies are flying up from these gorgeous flowers. So again, I'm going to be using the Distress Stains as a paint this time, and I am just squeezing a little bit of that out of the container and then colouring in each of my blossoms. So starting out with the squeezed lemonade, and then I'm adding a little bit of the ripe persimmon, not riped persimmon, and just dotting that into the centres. And then I mix the two colours together just to give me a lighter orange to add some shading to the petals of the flowers. I'm literally just adding that in where the line work is on the stamp, so perfect idea of where the shading would be on those petals. Now these colours are quite vibrant, and I could have opted to add some water into my Distress Stains to lighten them up a little bit, but at the time I thought I was going for vibrant, so I didn't do that. So just pointing that out to you, if you want to use your Distress Stains and your colours are a little bit vibrant, then add some water to those little puddles and you will lighten the colour. So this one is Mowed Lawn, and I am colouring in all of the leaves. And then because I decided I want to layer and decoupage some of these flowers up to add some dimension to this cluster of flowers, I need to repeat that process with a whole heap more blossoms. So this time I'm stamping onto a spare piece of card and then colouring them in just as I did on the original page. And because I liked the effect so much, you'll see that I end up doing a few more flowers and also a few butterflies. I know this is looking quite pretty and it just isn't gelling with me, and the main reason is because I'm not really a huge bright person and I like pastels basically. So this is where I started to get out my gesso, and that became the theme of the page really. If you start to think that you're doing a journal page and you're not quite happy with it, remember your gesso. So I'm taking some of my Faber-Castell gesso here and I am going to lighten all of these colours. Now I have to be a little bit careful because the colour that I've used to colour in is water soluble, and I'm adding another water based product on top of this, and I've just made a little bit of a wash with my gesso, so added some water to the gesso and I'm going over my flowers and deciding how much to lighten them. And you can see straight away I'm just literally adding a little bit of that milky mix on top of my artwork and blotting it off gently with a bit of kitchen roll. And then coming in and doing the yellow flowers. And the reason I did it this way was I just wanted to make sure that I didn't contaminate one colour with the other if any of that base colour lifted. It's dry, but it's not permanent, and you can make it move again by adding water. So just be a little bit careful when working on top of either distress stains or distress inks if you're adding your gesso. So it really is a fix-all. If your colours aren't quite gelling or you want to bring things together a little bit more, a layer of gesso often does the trick, and you just keep going until you're happy with the depth. So I'm going to repeat this process a couple of times, and I'm also going to do the same effect onto the spare images that I've got that I want to cut out. And what I tried to do was make the background, these ones that I'm working on now, lighter than the ones that I'm going to decoupage on top, so I get a little bit of difference in shade as well. So as I said, I'm going to do exactly the same, but this time just one coat of the gesso to lighten the images that I'm going to cut out. Because I need to colour in that sky area of this picture, I'm thinking of another way to create a resist, and I'm going to use this Faber-Castell glaze. First time I've used it, as you can see, and you will see that it works a treat. So what I'm doing is using the glaze to make a resist over the flowers that I've already stamped. I could have done this with the butterflies instead of the tissue tape if I wanted to, but this is all about exploring and finding out new things. So I'm brushing a layer of the glaze directly over the flowers, so colouring in the flowers completely with a layer of this glaze, and this glaze will dry shiny, but it's not super shiny, it's quite nice actually, quite subtle shiny, and I am making sure that the flowers are covered but they're not thick with the glaze. So I'm taking a little bit of time once I've coloured them in just to smooth out my brush strokes and create a nice finish over those gessoed flowers. And then doing the same thing, but I don't have to be so careful as these are going to be cut out over my spare flowers. So making sure that this resist layer is completely dry before I move on to the next step. If it's wet, it won't resist, so make sure that everything is dry before you move on. I thought it might be nice to use some of that glaze to add another resist into the background of my journal page. So I'm using Tim Holtz's bubble stencil and my Faber-Castell glaze, which I'm just adding or applying with a little piece of sponge. You can't really see it on camera, but you'll see it revealed beautifully when we add the next layer. So I'm also repeating that stencil and glaze technique onto my tags. So I've got to dry one side and then flip the tag over and repeat the process on the other side. So making sure all of that texture is dry and adding some more distress stains to my craft mats. I'm using peacock feathers and just trying to think of the blue colour. The salty ocean. Just had a look at my distress inks on the shelf next to me, and I've sprayed them with some water, and then I'm just pressing my page into that puddle of gorgeous colour on my craft sheet. So you can get this as wet as you like, you can make it run. I like to put it through to get the main colour to start with and then add some texture by dotting into the remainder of the ink at the second layer. So whilst this is wet, I'm taking again a piece of kitchen towel and just blotting those areas where that resist is. So in particular paying attention to my flowers, just removing that ink. It comes off quite easily and doesn't affect the background. So I'm adding a little bit of water to make things run and blend in, and again just dotting it back in that ink so that I get the main part of the page covered, and you can see how beautifully that glaze resisted that distress stain in both the flowers and the texture that I added through a stencil. So again, I'm just dotting some of that colour, this time just the peacock feathers, and then coming in and adding some dotty texture across my page. So if your page starts to get a little bit wet, dry it off and then carry on adding your layers of ink until you're happy with the overall effect. So as well as my page, I'm also going to repeat those processes on both sides of my tag. So laying down the ink, spraying with water, and then blotting off onto my tag, making sure that I blot off the excess on those areas where I have created the resist. And really making sure that I do dry off my tag because it's getting the wet medium from both sides. And then I like to just add speckles of that colour, so I'm definitely trying not to swoosh or smoosh. I'm taking off the excess on an extra bit of paper and then adding the remaining dots to create another area of texture over my page. So I've got my journal page and my tag ready. Now I want to create a barrier for my next layer. So again, I'm making a little milky mix with my gesso by adding water to it and then just lightening my background slightly with a layer of gesso. Repeating that step on each side of my tags or tag. So what else can you do with your gesso? So I've progressed now from different resist techniques to what can you do with your gesso if you're not quite happy with your page and you want to do something about it. You can completely gesso over your page if you want to and go back to the beginning and start again. I've just used some of that gesso mix to add a little bit of splatter, so that's also adding some more texture to my work, and I'm just taking off the splatter where I don't want it by using a little piece of kitchen roll. So you can see I'm just dabbing the butterflies and over that strip at the top of the tag. So as well as splattering, and we all like a little bit of splattering in our journal, I'm also going to repeat that process to get some finer texture with my distress stains. So using a little bit of that salty ocean, again trying to, you can't control it exactly, but trying to keep it into that sky area. And if I get any over splash, because I've got that glazed layer, it's easy to remove from the flowers and from the tissue tape. And I'm going to repeat the process on the tags and then repeat the process again with some of the peacock distress stain. So just make sure you dry your splatter in between applications, because if you don't, you'll get one splatter blending into another. If you want that look, then don't dry your splatter in between changing your colours. It doesn't matter quite so much here because I would just get another variation of a blue, but if you were perhaps splattering with yellow and red, you would get an orange, for instance, if they blended together. Now, because I want to use my Pitt pen next to add some shading into the background of this page, I'm going to seal everything with a layer of Ranger. It's actually called Glue and Seal, and it is, this one actually has a matte finish. So make sure your brush is dry and then I'm just literally brushing over everything on the page before I move on to the next step. So cover the page and cover your tags and then dry everything off. Really important to make sure everything is dry before moving on to the next step, otherwise you will spoil your pens. So just deciding what colour to use. So I'm using the Cobalt Turquoise and I am going all the way around my edges, the edges of what is the sky area, and blending that ink into towards the centre of the page. I really love this technique, and you'll see me do it quite often around different elements that I've added onto my journal page, just to give them emphasis and add shadows. So they work perfectly for borders, they can be used to colour in, they can be sprayed with water while they're wet, but once they are dry they are permanent. So the next layer that you add, you don't need to worry about that ink shifting so long as it is completely dry. So as well as going around my flowers, I'm going to go around my butterflies. You can see I'm really just pushing that into the centre and then coming back in and colouring in the areas between the flowers. So when you're doing this, and when you're colouring in, if you do get it where you don't want it, just take your baby wipe and rub over that area and it will remove the ink. So I can easily make sure there's nothing on my flowers, for instance. It's only once it's dry that it is permanent. And I've used these for so many different techniques now. They're perfect for stamping with, and definitely worth the investment. And I was lucky that I actually got them for Christmas for my mum, but you can collect them in little groups, little sets of colours, or individually. So you could start off by getting a couple that you think you will use quite often and give them a go. So repeating that process on each of my tags. And you can see here I did go and stamp a whole load more of those flowers and butterflies ready to decoupage up. Okay, so I'm still feeling that things are a little bit brighter than I want them, so out with that gesso again and adding another layer over the whole page and over the tag, of course. It looks drastic, but once it's dried, it just brings everything together. So by this point, my butterflies have really faded colour-wise, and I want to bring a little bit of colour back to those butterflies. So I'm just painting over those in exactly the same way I did with the original stamped image. So this is a little bit better and they look a little bit more in keeping now. All those extra layers that I added definitely dulled down the colour underneath the tissue tape. But because I liked the dimension that adding those extra layers was bringing to the page, I'm going to do exactly the same for the butterflies. You can still see the work underneath because those butterfly wings will be lifted, but I probably could have just stuck these on without doing all that with the tissue tape. It's all about the process and how things work. Definitely this works, but it just ended up not being the look that I was going for on this page. So now it's all about cutting out all of those flowers and butterflies and layering them up on my page. Some of them I'm going to stick down flat, so they are another layer, but they aren't quite as raised, and some of them I am going to raise, but I'm not using foam pads. I'm just shaping the paper and then perhaps sticking the centres of the flowers with the petals raised. So time to start sticking. I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to the body of each of the butterflies. I'm keeping that one flat because that's actually going to be in the folded area of the gusset of the page. And then you can see some of the pieces like this one are flat and some are shaped and raised. So this one's going to be flat because it's over that gusset, so I'll just spend a little bit of time putting that fold back in. Another one that's flat, just raising those top petals a little bit. And this one is shaped, as is this one. You can see I'm just adding glue to either the whole flower or the centre of the flower if it is shaped. And then I'm just going along the bottom of the page and trimming off any excess flower. And this is one of the other techniques that always help a page. A little bit of doodling. Get out your black pen and add some elements that just bring the whole design together. And I'm going for a real sketchy look, and although I've got beautiful stamped images, I'm going to make it look like I drew them a little bit. And I'm just going to add some details. So I'm adding some little flight paths for my butterflies. I think they've been on the sherry. They're just fluttering about the page. And then I'm coming in and doing a little bit of sketching. I'm not trying to be perfect, I'm deliberately trying to just be fluid and sketchy with my details. Obviously using the stamped image itself as a guide. And you can see because we've added all that gesso, the lines pop and just bring that whole piece together. And this is where my little, I can't exactly call it a quote, words of wisdom that many a mixed media artist or art journaler will know and understand. And it's all about just sort of just going with your work, really. If things aren't quite going to plan, there's always something that you can do. And in this case, I'm advocating the gesso to bring things together and that black pen of yours just to finish things off. So if in doubt, get your gesso and black pen out. You can see if your stamping's not quite right, just get that black pen and everything will be perfect. So usually at this point I will get to work on my tag. I always add a picture of the tag that Tim made for this particular month. So his 12th tag, or his 12 tags of 2016. I will stick a picture of his May tag that I showed you at the beginning of this video onto the back of my tag, and on the front of the tag I will journal about a memory, something to do with May that either happened or has happened in the past, or something that this journal page has reminded me of. So I'm just going to finish the tag off and it will be ready for once my printer is back in with ink, which I'm waiting to arrive. I will show you probably on another journal page exactly what I did on this tag. Exactly as I did on my main page, just add that sketchy detail and recoloured my butterflies so that the tag is ready to finish off once that print is working. Decided to add a little flower to the top of the tag as a pull instead of ribbon. And as usual, I'm going to add the date to that little band at the top of the tag, because this will show at the top of the pocket. So I'm going to put May 2016. Adding that sketchy emphasis to the flowers. You can see I just covered the back with tissue tape because the petals will show at the back of the tag. Another one of my favourite processes is a little bit of extra splatter. So in with the white gesso to start with, and then I'm just using a little bit of Faber-Castell black chalkboard paint because I couldn't be bothered to go and find my acrylic paint, and this works just as well for a little bit of black splatter. A little bit of white and a little bit of the black, and that's everything finished off. So as you know, this is my version of 12 tags of 2016, which is Tim Holtz challenge that I've played along with for quite a few years, and I've been making these journal pages based on his tags, and you can see how each of the pages are going to be joined together to form a pocket. Each of my tags will have something to do with that month, the memory that's prompted by that month, and on the back of the tag is the actual original inspiration, which is Tim Holtz's tag. So although I've got that's January, February, March and April are missing, this will be May, and you can see how that tag will sit in the pocket and how this page will look in the series. The link to the playlist and the individual pages will be at the end of this video, but I just thought I'd show you my two tags. So at the beginning I showed you the two tags that Tim took his original technique inspiration from, and this is me taking out one of the two tags that are entirely different to his, but again they were based on his original inspiration. So this really is a fun challenge if you want to try out new techniques and just see where they lead. So these are my two tags. One of them has the tissue tape resist, which is the fairy tag, and the other one has my version of the tattered florals, which were the little pom-pom flowers. So that's the tissue tape resist on that tag, and then these little pom-pom flowers were, I wanted to use flowers on the tag like Tim had, but I didn't have the Tattered Florals die, so I made some little tiny pom-pom flowers instead. And I've noticed over the years of playing this how more and more people have progressed from mimicking Tim's tags, which is perfectly fine because you learn lots of new stuff, and if you're particularly new to crafting, it's a great way to work on those skills, but also how things are progressing with each of those people that play along, how many different interpretations there are on a theme. Things might change because you don't have a particular product, or they might change because you haven't got the colours that Tim's using, but either way you will always end up with something unique and original to you. And this little storage solution is something that I came up with because I have a great many tags from playing along with these challenges over the years. And if you want to get your hands on this tutorial, I will also leave a link to this at the end of my video. Almost forgot what I was doing then. So back to this month's page. I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I hope that you like it too and have got some inspiration so that you can go and create gorgeous pages and tags like this one. Pop along to Tim Holtz's blog, there'll be a link in the description down below. See what he did this month, see what other people are up to, and maybe even join in yourself. It really is great fun and a great workout for your mixed media skills. And as usual, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, the share button, and spread this creativity with your friends. I really do appreciate it when you press that share button in particular, and love to have you subscribe and join me on this creative journey. Until next time, thank you for watching. as promised, here's those links to those pages. So this was January's page, and here's the link. There's also a link to the playlist, which obviously will grow as the year progresses and I catch up with myself. This is the link to the February journal page. And they were all based on tags originally in the 12 tags of 20, whatever year it may be. This was from 2013, and this is the 12 tags of 2013 playlist. This one was from 2014. You can tell I've been playing a long time. This is the playlist for that particular year. Tons and tons of technique, lots of inspiration, and each tag turning out completely differently, and that is 2015. So if you're looking for journal pages in particular, this is the link to my journal pages playlist. And then last but not least, here is that little tagged storage project I told you all about. This is available on my Etsy shop, and you can make it in any style you like. This was my Zentangle alphabets, and I had great fun Zentangling the entire project. This is a Christmas version where you can make a Christmas countdown. It really is a versatile project. It's available from my Etsy shop, full video tutorial, as well as a photograph or a a printout of instructions and measurements, etc. Everything you need in order to be able to make this gorgeous project to store your tags. See you next time.